Greetings, everybody. Here it's Rainwalker, and I'm here with you from www.rainwalker.us. In this video, as quickly as I possibly can, I'm going to offer an answer to the question, what is the Rainwalker fundamental theory of human mental health? Okay, now I'm going to present this as a lecture, and I know that that's actually not the best way. If I had my choice, I would present this information to you as a conversation. And if I really had everything I wanted, I would be having a conversation about this theory, okay, with somebody who doesn't know much about it in front of a panel of about 5 experts, okay? Maybe we can get there. The experts I would like to have on hand would be a psychologist, psychiatrist, a medical doctor, and a neuroscientist. And then maybe the 5th expert would be somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who sort of is an excellent moderator and can do, a better job of sort of interpreting fancy words, to an audience, including everybody. Than I might be able to do in the middle of a conversation. All right? And so, the basic ideas behind the Rainwalker fundamental theory of human mental health are up here at the very top, and I hope I can show them to you as I'm trying to talk and steer the camera at the same time. We're going to talk about social sentience, we're going to talk about asymmetric shared emotionality, and we're going to speak about information qualification. Those are pretty fancy words. Don't worry about them now. We'll start to use them, and then we can get an active definition of what those big terms mean as we speak. Okay, so let's introduce this whole concept basically by talking a little bit about what is the scientific process. Okay, and for me, I think what the basic idea is that scientific process is about believing truth and then working to apply it. Now, already, it seems to me that there's a lot of work to be done just in the working to apply it kind of section. I think everybody who's basically familiar with climate science would maybe agree with me on that point. My personal motivation comes from kind of a disaster in the scientific and psychotherapeutic industries in terms of applying scientific findings. Because when I started to go to serious psychotherapy in 1999 and 2000, it later became clear to me that the therapists I was meeting with were up to 30 or 40 years behind proven scientific results. Okay, and so I'm going to introduce some of those results as I continue to offer an exposition of my ideas in public. Okay, so we just have to understand that scientific progress basically is often slow, ugly, sacrificial. It requires experimentation, and then finally, kind of at the very end of the scientific process, that's only when we finally get to, the actual implementation. And so that's down here. Okay, so to give you kind of a story about what scientific progress is really like, the key phrase I think of is that the experts sometimes miss the forest for the trees. Okay, and that's not necessarily a criticism. It may just be sort of an unavoidable part of the scientific process. Okay. And as I began to research plausibility evidence for the theory that I discovered in personal experience, okay, it kind of came to me that the right image to use in thinking about how the other real scientists went about discovering, their scientific results was as though they were exploring a dark mansion of truth with a flashlight, okay? And so here's the way I feel like most neuroscientists work. They find a flashlight and they get some funding. And they're like, okay, we're going to use the funding and we're going to go make an exploration, And so they go rushing off into this dark mansion of truth. And the mansion of truth is what I'm saying. It's like the Platonic reality. It's like where everything that can ever possibly be found as being true is hidden, but it's always in the dark. And so you got to take a light with you, okay? And so then a researcher will go off and he'll do some research and he'll do his literature review. And then he'll put together a hypothesis and he'll have his experiment and then he'll find a screwdriver, all right? And it could be a she. Maybe she'll find a screwdriver, right? So they've gone running into the mansion of truth with their flashlight. They found a screwdriver. And here's what they do immediately. They grab the screwdriver and they throw it out on the front lawn. And they're like, I found a screwdriver. And they get published and they get lectures and they get maybe more funding. And in some cases they actually do, and they actually have applied their findings into practical reality, like revising how the subject is taught in a theoretical way in academics. And some people have successfully upgraded, our psychotherapeutic industries. Okay, and it's a great way to go, but it's been very obvious to me, in my impression, that this process of rushing into the mansion of truth with a flashlight has left a big hole in integrating the findings of, in this case, neuroscience, psychology, evolutionary science even. Okay, and so with that in mind, let's go ahead and get into my own hypothesis now, okay, about the fundamental nature of human mental health. Okay, the best way to get into it right away, I guess, is to introduce my fundamental hypothesis of human mental health. And again, this is going to be more big words, and then we'll kind of back off of the big words and look at some concepts. And as we continue to use these in this video and other videos, everything will become clear. Okay, so my fundamental Rainwalker's hypothesis of human mental health goes like this. The optimal method of establishing, maintaining, and recovering optimal human mental health across development, maturation, and aging is to participate regularly in vividly facially expressive, vaguely vulnerable, and mutual mimicry intensive face-to-face conversations. I understand that's quite a mouthful. The basic idea is that the more sane people use facial expressions more, and the hypothesis for therapy especially is the more you use facial expressions, the more sane you are likely to become. Okay, this is a big long thing because there's a little bit of subtlety. Okay, nobody else has articulated this. It might sound like it if I'm just talking about facial expressions, but this is a new idea. And part of the subtlety is right here, this one phrase, vaguely vulnerable. The reason that is so important, okay, is because of what I call the flight to the abstract. Okay, humans will rely on their intellect starting right away at birth. And so by doing that, which is a desirable feature of human adaptation and evolution, okay, by doing that, we can become vulnerable to various problems. Okay, so by being facially expressive in the vaguely vulnerable way across all of human life, my hypothesis is that we can recover to the maximum any available therapy and recovery of desirable mental health. Okay, so that's the fundamental idea. Let's define a few terms and we'll come back at it from a different angle. When I think of the human mind, what I mean is a tool of adaptation. In other words, a tool of survival and advancement, and in many cases, a tool of sort of healing or recovery that is highly abstract. Okay, mental health is the desirable use of our conscious, abstract intelligence powers. The opposite of mental health would be mental illness, and mental illness needs to be, by definition, something that involves harm. Okay. Another term that's important to understand here is the vagus nerve, and the kind of the adjective form of the vagus nerve is vagal, so that's where vagal vulnerability comes in. The vagus nerve is the nerve that really connects the brain to the heart, the lungs, and the guts. And the vagus nerve runs actually forward of the spinal cord. All right, so many people with spinal injury have an absolutely healthy vagus nerve complex. Okay, and that's maybe why people who are paralyzed can still breathe and have a heartbeat, digest food, and have a normal emotional life. Okay, in many ways. By abstraction, I mean things like consciousness. I mean the ability for a human to use language, to imagine usefully and correctly time. Those are all abstract capabilities. Okay. Another important sort of definitive term for understanding my fundamental theory of mental health is calibration. And this basically means testing the limits so that normal daily operations are within desirable parameters. Those are all big words. I'm sorry about all that. Okay, and really, I think the core of my theory is perhaps just all about information qualification. Okay, and again, this is so hard to do. I'm very poor. That's why I'm sort of doing this on an Amazon tablet. I have to hold my hand. Okay, so when we're talking about human organisms, or any organisms, what we're talking about with survival and adaptability is the ability to regulate the self. How do you procure food? How do you get food? How do you reproduce? How do you decide what you should do today? How do you decide what you should do with resources? All of that is covered by this concept of self-regulation. And I'm going to argue that the best way to understand humans, and especially human mental health and our human abstract powers, is by understanding humans as both self and socially regulated individual organisms. Think about that. Okay, What is desirable self and other adaptation? Well, basically, again, it's just benefit instead of harm. My theory is also all about systems integration. What we want to think about, and we're talking about human mental health, is efficient computation. Okay. Now, computation. Oh my God, this is so